One day he came in and said, I'm quitting. We said, why? You're doing great. He said, you want to know what's in the box? Open it up. You want to know what's in the envelope? Tear it open. You're trivializing what I can do. I can see anywhere on the planet, maybe even off planet, and here you are doing these stupid experiments. So I said, okay, well, what do you mean? What do you have in mind? He said, just send somebody randomly out in the San Francisco Bay Area and I'll describe where they are. Well, that was too far out even for us, and so even having seen this data, so we refused to do the experiment. And after a while, he really was going to quit. And so he said, okay, well, tell you what, we'll do some of these on a coffee break because we don't have to report to our sponsor that we're doing this kind of weird experiment. So in fact, we did a few, and he did well. And so finally, we told our sponsor that, well, it seems like he not only sees inside of superconducting shielded little containers, inside boxes, etc., but basically you can look out and see things in the environment, in the physical environment of the city. So they said, well, if that's true, now you have to remember, they were not happy seeing us get good results because their hope was to prove that this stuff the Russians were doing was just nonsense. And so every time we'd get excited about getting a good result, they would get more depressed. And that's just part of what we had to deal with. So anyway, this is what started us off on what we now call remote viewing, which means really viewing remote locations. I'm going to give you some examples of remote viewing to show you what's good about remote viewing and also what's wrong or difficult about remote viewing. Here's remote viewing. This was done later in the program. By this time, we were training Army intelligence officers from the Army Intelligence and Security Command out of Fort Meade. This particular one was done by Joe McMonigal, sitting here in the fourth row. This is what you'd like remote viewing to always be. We had a very elaborate protocol with all kinds of double-blind things, sending people out into the San Francisco Bay Area to stand at some site for 30 minutes, and the remote viewer was to make a drawing and give some narration of what he saw. Well, unless you were an artist, you could hardly do better if you were standing there. Well, that's neat. You'd love to see that all the time. But actually what we usually see is more like this. Here's a case where Hella Hammond was the remote viewer. She's the one that did the cans experiment. In this case, I was the outbound person, and I was standing on this overpass over the Bayshore Freeway. What she says is, well, I can't quite tell where he is, but there are a lot of things going by fast. But she couldn't tell there were cars. And she said, if you're standing where he is, it sort of looks like that. And it's some kind of diagonal trough up in the air, but it has holes in it so it couldn't carry water. But she couldn't interpret what it was. Well, at the time we thought, well, maybe she's just off today or whatever. But in fact, this is the kind of pattern that finally emerged, that people could get flashes and patterns and pieces of a site, but not necessarily, if they turned on their analytical mind to try to figure out what it was actually was and tried to interpret what they were seeing, that's usually when they would go off base. Here's an example of that. This is done with Pat Price, who's a police commissioner, ex-police commissioner from Burbank. He heard about our program. He said that he had noticed some flashes when they were working on criminal cases that turned out to work. Could he come and volunteer for some experiments? Well, it turned out he was really good. Here's a case where the actual location was a swimming pool complex, Rinconada Park. He says, I see a circular pool of water 120 feet in diameter. It's really 110. I see a rectangular pool 60 by 89 feet. It's really 75 by 100. He described this quite excellently. But actually what's most interesting about his drawing is what's wrong with it. First of all, you notice there's a left-right reversal. You're standing at the pool house, that's on the right, not the left. He had a couple of tanks of water that came out of his imagination. They're not there. And we asked him what kind of place, because we're not yet onto the fact that interpretation is a bad route to go down. He said, well, I think it's a water purification plant, and he put machinery in the pools, which weren't there. So he's getting a combination of what appeared to be real data, on the other hand, being what we now call analytical overlay, because as part of our survival mechanism, we always want to interpret what's happening because that's good for survival. And so it's very hard to let go of that need to interpret. This is Pat Price in the center. I'll let you guess who the CIA agent is. Kit Green, some of us know him. My hair was a little darker and I was a little thinner, but there we are. We were called the Plaid Pants Trio once this picture... So we did a number of experiments with him. At the time, we had a problem. There were people in SRI who hated that this program was at SRI. They said it's going to ruin our credibility. We're not going to be able to get contracts. So the people at SRI that didn't like us being there and hoped to get rid of us were given the task to figure out how to evaluate this stuff. And so what they came up with was this procedure. You go ahead and do a series of experiments. You randomly number the transcripts. You give a list of the targets that we're seeing. And then this is what happened. You get a judge who doesn't know which targets go with which transcript. And he goes out to one of the targets, say Hoover Tower. He reads all the transcripts. He says, well, that's the best match, transcript 1 is the second best match, this is the third best match, etc., etc. These are all sort of the same, so I'll give them an average match. Then you go out to the next target, and you read all the same transcripts again, and again, you say, what's the best match, second best match, third best match, etc. And then only when we get to the end and we break the code and put it in this format do we find that, in fact, 7 of the 9 times, the correct transcript was matched to the correct target. What that means in real terms is if somebody had been kidnapped 9 times and you had a list of the possible places that he could have been taken, 7 of the 9 times you would have gone to the right place first. Of course, the people who designed this were really upset now. Well, we wondered, what is it with these people? How can they do this? In our wisdom, we figured, well, it's probably something different about them physically. So we gave them a bunch of tests. We even included a 7-layer scan of their brains. By the time we got done with that series of tests, and then asked, well, what'd you find? They said, these people are normal. They're just normal. So in our wisdom, we decided, okay, well, then it must be neuropsychological or psychological. So we gave them all these tests. When we got to the end, we knew more about our remote viewers than NASA knew about its astronauts. And I said, well, please, you must have found something different. And the psychologist, the only thing he had to say was, well, when I was interviewing Pat Price, I asked him to remember, what was his early experiences in life like. And he asked me, do you want me to stick to this lifetime? That's about as weird as it got. Well, here we are turning these results into CIA. They're getting nervous. They've now decided, by the way, and hoped, that we must be in collusion with the subjects. They did not want to be seeing this happening. So they sent out a fellow to check us out. He showed up and said, my name's Ed, but you can call me Scam Buster. I'm here to see what the fraud is. All right? Well, we'll start doing some experiments. You want to see some regular remote viewing experiments? Yes, that's what I want to see. Okay, fine.